Babylon, a name that echoes through history as one of the greatest civilizations ever. A city of power, wealth, and knowledge. A place of towering ziggurats, mighty walls, and legendary rulers. But also a city of conquest, betrayal, and ultimate downfall. For centuries, Babylon was more than just a city. It was the beating heart of an empire, a beacon of culture, law, and innovation. It stood at the crossroads of the ancient world, a place where trade flourished, where gods were worshipped in grand temples, and where rulers sought to immortalize their legacies through colossal structures and ambitious conquests. This was a city that inspired both awe and fear, a city that was spoken of in both reverence and condemnation. It was home to the Hanging Gardens, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, if they truly existed. It was the birthplace of the Code of Hammurabi, one of the first legal systems in human history. And it was the stage where legendary kings such as Nebuchadnezzar II and Hammurabi shaped the destiny of Mesopotamia. But Babylon was also a city of contradictions. It was a place of enlightenment, where scholars charted the stars and recorded history on clay tablets. Yet it was also a city of conquest, where armies marched through its fabled Ishtar Gate, taking prisoners, razing lands, and expanding empires. It was a city built on power, but haunted by instability, rising and falling like the great empires that sought to control it. Its walls, once considered impenetrable, eventually crumbled, not just under the weight of invading forces, but also from the decay of time and internal strife. How did this legendary city rise from a small settlement on the banks of the Euphrates to become the most powerful city in the world? What made it a center of knowledge, faith, and law? And why, despite its magnificence, did Babylon ultimately fall, vanishing into dust, leaving only ruins behind? To understand the full history of Babylon, we must travel back over 4,000 years to the very dawn of civilization. The story of Babylon is the story of humanity itself, a tale of ambition, glory, and the relentless pursuit of power. This is the rise and fall of Babylon. Babylon, before it became a grand empire, before its mighty kings and towering walls, was once a small and unremarkable settlement on the banks of the Euphrates River. Situated in the heart of Mesopotamia, this land was known as the cradle of civilization, where some of the world's earliest cities and societies emerged. But what made this particular city, Babylon, rise above all others? How did a small town become the most powerful city in the world? To answer this, we must travel back to the very origins of Mesopotamian civilization, a world dominated by the Sumerians, Akkadians, and Amorites, where Babylon was just a name among many. Long before Babylon, Mesopotamia had already witnessed the birth of civilization. The region, spanning modern-day Iraq, parts of Syria, and Turkey, was home to the Sumerians, who had established the first great cities such as Ur, Uruk, and Lagash around 3000 BCE. These early city-states developed writing, cuneiform, built massive step temples, ziggurats, and created the first forms of government and trade networks. Their influence laid the foundation for all future civilizations in the region. But Mesopotamia was not just home to one great people. As the centuries passed, new groups emerged, competing for dominance. The Akkadians, a Semitic-speaking people from the north, began expanding their influence. Around 2334 BCE, one of history's first empire builders, Sargon of Akkad, rose to power. He united the warring Sumerian city-states into a single empire, creating what is now considered the world's first empire, the Akkadian Empire. During Sargon's reign, Babylon was nothing more than a small town under Akkadian rule. However, Sargon's empire would not last forever. After his death, the Akkadian Empire weakened and new powers began to rise. Among them were the Amorites, a nomadic people who would soon take Babylon and change its fate forever. By 1900 BCE, the Akkadian Empire had fallen, and Mesopotamia had fragmented into smaller kingdoms. The Amorites, originally outsiders from the western deserts, started infiltrating the region. Instead of waging outright war, they slowly took control of cities by becoming rulers and military leaders. One such Amorite leader, Sumu-Abum, established a new ruling dynasty in Babylon around 1894 BCE. This marked the beginning of the First Babylonian dynasty, but Babylon was still far from becoming a superpower. At this time, cities like Eson, Larsa, and Assur were more powerful, and Babylon was just another small kingdom competing for dominance. However, everything changed when a man named Hammurabi took the throne. Babylon, before it became a grand empire, before its mighty kings and towering walls, was once a small and unremarkable settlement on the banks of the Euphrates River. Situated in the heart of Mesopotamia, this land was known as the cradle of civilization, where some of the world's earliest cities and societies emerged. But what made this particular city, Babylon, rise above all others? How did a small town become the most powerful city in the world? To answer this, we must travel back to the very origins of Mesopotamian civilization, a world dominated by the Sumerians, Akkadians, and Amorites, where Babylon was just a name among many. Long before Babylon, Mesopotamia had already witnessed the birth of civilization. The region, spanning modern-day Iraq, parts of Syria, and Turkey, was home to the Sumerians, who had established the first great cities such as Ur, Uruk, and Lagash around 3000 BCE. These early city-states developed writing, cuneiform, built massive step temples, ziggurats, and created the first forms of government and trade networks. Their influence laid the foundation for all future civilizations in the region. But Mesopotamia was not just home to one great people. As the centuries passed, new groups emerged, competing for dominance. The Akkadians, a Semitic-speaking people from the north, began expanding their influence. Around 2334 BCE, one of history's first empire builders, Sargon of Akkad, rose to power. He united the warring Sumerian city-states into a single empire, creating what is now considered the world's first empire, the Akkadian Empire. During Sargon's reign, Babylon was nothing more than a small town under Akkadian rule. However, Sargon's empire would not last forever. After his death, the Akkadian Empire weakened and new powers began to rise. Among them were the Amorites, a nomadic people who would soon take Babylon and change its fate forever. By 1900 BCE, the Akkadian Empire had fallen, and Mesopotamia had fragmented into smaller kingdoms. The Amorites, originally outsiders from the western deserts, started infiltrating the region. Instead of waging outright war, they slowly took control of cities by becoming rulers and military leaders. One such Amorite leader, Sumu-Abum, established a new ruling dynasty in Babylon around 1894 BCE. This marked the beginning of the first Babylonian dynasty, but Babylon was still far from becoming a superpower. At this time, cities like Eson, Larsa, and Assur were more powerful, and Babylon was just another small kingdom competing for dominance. However, everything changed when a man named Hammurabi took the throne. While Hammurabi was a conqueror, his greatest legacy was not war, it was law. In order to govern his vast empire, Hammurabi created one of the first written legal codes in history, known as the Code of Hammurabi. This set of 282 laws covered everything from trade and property to marriage and crime. It established the principle of an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a concept that influenced legal systems for centuries. But Hammurabi's laws weren't just about punishment, they also protected the weak, ensuring that widows, orphans, and the poor had rights. Hammurabi's legal system was inscribed on a massive stone pillar and placed in the temple of Marduk, the chief god of Babylon. This act reinforced the idea that the king was chosen by the gods to maintain order and justice, solidifying his rule and setting Babylon apart as a civilized and organized state. With laws in place, trade flourishing, and rivals defeated, Babylon entered its golden age under Hammurabi. The city's architecture reflected its new power. Massive temples, grand palaces, and fortified walls were constructed. The city became home to scholars, scribes, and astronomers who recorded their knowledge on clay tablets that would survive for thousands of years. For the first time in history, Babylon was not just a city, it was the center of the world. It had overtaken Sumerian cities in the south and Assyrian rivals in the north, standing as the cultural and military capital of Mesopotamia. However, Hammurabi's empire, like all great powers, would not last forever. After his death in 1750 BCE, Babylon's fortunes began to shift. His successors struggled to maintain control, and soon, new invaders emerged, threatening Babylon's dominance. Though the city would rise and fall many times, the legacy of Hammurabi and the foundations he laid would endure, setting the stage for the next chapters in Babylon's history. By the time Hammurabi ascended the throne of Babylon in 1792 BCE, the city was still one among many in Mesopotamia. It had grown into a regional power, but it was far from the dominant force in the region. However, over the course of his 42-year reign, Hammurabi would do what no king before him had managed. He would unite all of Mesopotamia under Babylonian rule, turning the city into the undisputed capital of the ancient world. His rule was a turning point in history, not just because of his military campaigns, but because of his vision for a structured and just society. He created one of the first comprehensive legal systems, expanded trade, built grand monuments, and transformed Babylon into a cultural and intellectual center. His name would be forever etched into history, as his laws and policies influenced civilizations for centuries to come. But like all great empires, Hammurabi's Babylon would not last forever. So how did he achieve his power, and why did his dynasty eventually collapse? When Hammurabi took the throne, Mesopotamia was divided into several powerful city-states, each vying for dominance. To the south were the cities of Larsa and Isin, locked in a constant struggle for control over the region. To the east, the Elamites were a growing threat. In the north, the mighty kingdoms of Mari and Eshnunna controlled key trade routes. At this point, Babylon was just one of many, with no real superiority over its rivals. But Hammurabi was a master of diplomacy and strategy. Instead of launching an all-out war against his enemies, he first strengthened Babylon internally, improving its economy, military, and infrastructure. He formed alliances with some of his most powerful rivals, particularly with the king of Mari, which allowed him to focus on growing his city's wealth and influence. Then, once Babylon had become strong enough, he turned on his allies, one by one. In a series of brilliant military campaigns, Hammurabi conquered Larsa, Eshnunna, and Mari, bringing them under Babylonian rule. By 1755 BCE, he had unified all of Mesopotamia under his control. For the first time in history, Babylon was the center of an empire. But Hammurabi was not just a conqueror, he was also a lawgiver, and his most lasting contribution to history was yet to come. To govern his vast empire, Hammurabi needed more than just military strength. He needed a system that would bring order and justice. And so he created one of the earliest and most famous legal codes in history, the Code of Hammurabi. This set of 282 laws was inscribed on a 7-foot-tall stone pillar, stele, and placed in the temple of Marduk, the chief deity of Babylon. The laws covered every aspect of life, from trade and contracts to marriage, crime, and slavery. The most famous principle of the code was an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a system of justice that ensured punishments were proportional to the crime. However, Hammurabi's laws were not equally fair to everyone. They were based on a strict social hierarchy, meaning that punishments for crimes depended on the social status of the victim and the perpetrator. For example, if a nobleman harmed a commoner, the punishment was often lighter than if a commoner harmed a noble. Despite this, Hammurabi's code was revolutionary. It was one of the first written legal systems, meaning that laws were now publicly recorded, preventing corrupt officials from making arbitrary decisions. It also established key legal principles that influenced later civilizations, including the Persians, Greeks, and Romans. The Code of Hammurabi was more than just a legal document. It was a symbol of Hammurabi's rule, reinforcing the idea that Babylon was a civilized and just empire. With his empire secure and his laws in place, Hammurabi focused on transforming Babylon into a great city. He commissioned the construction of temples, canals, and fortifications, making the city both a religious and economic hub. The Temple of Marduk, dedicated to Babylon's chief god, became the spiritual heart of the empire. It was a massive ziggurat, a towering step pyramid that dominated the skyline. Babylon's walls were reinforced, making it one of the most well-defended cities of its time. Trade flourished under Hammurabi's rule. Babylon became a key center for commerce, connecting trade routes from Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, to the Persian Gulf. Merchants from distant lands brought gold, silver, copper, textiles, and spices, further enriching the city. Babylon also became a center for literature, astronomy, and mathematics. Scribes recorded everything on clay tablets, preserving knowledge for future generations. Scholars studied the stars, recording celestial movements that would later influence the development of astronomy in Greek and Islamic civilizations. Under Hammurabi, Babylon was no longer just a city. It was the heart of a thriving empire. But empires do not last forever. And after his death, Babylon's fortunes would take a dramatic turn. Hammurabi's empire had been built on his personal leadership and military skill. But after his death in 1750 BCE, his successors were not as strong or capable. Without Hammurabi's firm control, Babylon's enemies saw an opportunity to strike back. The first major blow came from the Kassites, a mysterious people from the Zagros Mountains who began pushing into Mesopotamia. At the same time, the once defeated Elamites and Hittites also gained strength, seeking to reclaim lost territory. In 1595 BCE, the unthinkable happened. The Hittites, under King Mursili I, sacked Babylon. They marched into the city, looted its treasures, and ended Hammurabi's dynasty once and for all. Though the Hittites did not stay long, Babylon was left weakened and vulnerable. For the next several centuries, Babylon fell under the control of foreign rulers, including the Kassites, who ruled for over 400 years. Though Babylon remained an important city, it was no longer the supreme power of Mesopotamia. However, Babylon's story was far from over. Centuries later, under a new dynasty, it would rise again, more powerful and magnificent than ever. Although Hammurabi's empire collapsed, his impact on history endured. His legal code influenced countless civilizations, and his vision of a unified, structured empire set the stage for future rulers. The city of Babylon would rise and fall many times, but Hammurabi's name remained etched into history as the man who took a small city and turned it into the center of the ancient world. As Babylon moved forward, new rulers would emerge, most notably Nebuchadnezzar II, who would bring the city to its greatest heights. But that is a story for another chapter in the grand history of Babylon. Babylon, once the most powerful city in Mesopotamia under Hammurabi, would soon face centuries of foreign dominance. After his death in 1750 BCE, his empire began to weaken. The once unified lands of Mesopotamia fractured into smaller states, each vying for control. And as Babylon struggled to maintain its dominance, powerful foreign invaders saw an opportunity to strike. For the next several centuries, Babylon would fall under the rule of multiple foreign dynasties, each leaving its mark on the city. The once great empire of Hammurabi was no more. Babylon was now a prize, a city that every major power sought to control. The first disaster came in 1595 BCE, when the Hittites, a powerful kingdom from Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, launched a devastating raid on Babylon. Under the command of King Mursili I, the Hittite army stormed into Mesopotamia, reaching Babylon and sacking the city. The Hittites looted its temples, stole its treasures, and ended the rule of the first Babylonian dynasty. However, rather than staying to rule, the Hittites quickly retreated back to Anatolia, leaving Babylon in a state of chaos. This power vacuum would be quickly filled by another foreign group, the Kassites. Shortly after the Hittite invasion, a new group emerged to take control of Babylon. The Kassites, a people from the Zagros Mountains in present-day Iran. Unlike the Hittites, who simply plundered the city and left, the Kassites ruled Babylon for nearly 400 years, making their dynasty the longest lasting in Babylonian history. Under Kassite rule, Babylon lost its imperial dominance but remained a significant cultural and religious center. The Kassites adopted Babylonian traditions, worshipped Babylonian gods, and even preserved Hammurabi's legal code. They introduced new administrative structures, strengthened the city's defenses, and encouraged trade. Despite this stability, the Kassite rulers were never as powerful as Hammurabi's Babylon. They constantly faced threats from the Assyrians in the north and the Elamites in the east. Over time, their control weakened, and by 1155 BCE, their rule came to a violent end. The next major disaster in Babylon's history came from the Elamites, a powerful kingdom from modern-day southwestern Iran. In 1155 BCE, the Elamites launched an invasion of Babylon, overpowering the weakened Kassite rulers. Not only did they defeat Babylon militarily, But they also sacked the city, stealing its treasures, looting its temples, and even taking the sacred statue of Marduk, Babylon's chief god, back to Elam as a symbol of their victory. For the Babylonians, this was more than just a military defeat. It was a spiritual catastrophe. The loss of Marduk's statue meant that their god had been taken away from his people, and as a result, many believed that Babylon's divine protection had vanished. For a time, Babylon ceased to be a major power, and the once glorious city faded into the background as the Assyrians rose to prominence. While Babylon struggled to recover, another Mesopotamian power was rapidly expanding, the Assyrians. Unlike the Kassites, who ruled for centuries with relative stability, the Assyrians were a militaristic and brutal empire, known for their ferocious warriors and ruthless kings. By the 9th century BCE, the Assyrians had turned Babylon into a puppet state, controlling it through appointed governors. The city was still important culturally and religiously, but it was no longer independent. Assyrian kings ruled over Babylon from their own capitals, such as Nineveh and Ashur, using it as a secondary city rather than an imperial seat of power. But the Babylonians were not content with foreign rule. Rebellions frequently broke out against Assyrian dominance, and Babylon's people longed for a return to their former glory. These revolts culminated in one of the most tragic and brutal events in Babylon's history: its complete destruction at the hands of the Assyrian king Sennacherib. In 689 BCE, Babylon's rebellious nature finally provoked Sennacherib, one of Assyria's most infamous kings. Furious at the constant uprisings, he launched a massive military campaign against Babylon. But this was not just a conquest, it was an act of total annihilation. Sennacherib's army burned Babylon to the ground, tore down its temples, and diverted the waters of the Euphrates River to flood the ruins, ensuring that nothing remained. The destruction was so complete that he boasted, "I made its destruction greater than that by a flood," so that in days to come, the site of that city and its temples and its gods will be forgotten. For a time, it seemed as though Babylon had been erased from history. But empires rise and fall, and just when it seemed that Babylon's story was over, an unexpected twist changed everything. Though Sennacherib destroyed Babylon, his successors soon realized their mistake. The Assyrians faced backlash from their own people, who viewed the destruction of Babylon as an act of sacrilege. Just a few years later, Babylon was rebuilt by Sennacherib's own son, Esarhaddon, who tried to undo the damage and restore the city. But true Babylonian independence would not come until 612 BCE, when a coalition of Babylonians and Medes, a group from Iran, finally defeated the Assyrians, destroying Nineveh, the Assyrian capital. The Assyrian Empire collapsed, and from its ashes, a new Babylonian empire would rise. Under King Nabopolassar and his famous son, Nebuchadnezzar II, Babylon would reach its greatest heights, entering an era of power and splendor greater than anything seen before. The city would be rebuilt bigger, stronger, and more magnificent than ever. The Hanging Gardens, the Ishtar Gate, and the grand palaces of Nebuchadnezzar would turn Babylon into the greatest city in the world. Babylon had survived invasions, sackings, and centuries of foreign rule, but now it was finally time for its greatest chapter, its golden age under the Neo-Babylonian Empire. Conclusion: a city that refused to die. Despite being conquered, destroyed, and rebuilt multiple times, Babylon never disappeared. Each time it fell, it rose again, proving that it was more than just a city. It was an idea, a symbol of resilience and power. But the greatest era of Babylon was yet to come. Under Nebuchadnezzar II, the city would reach unimaginable heights, creating some of the most famous landmarks in history. However, even in its golden age, Babylon's fate was still uncertain. A new power was rising in the east, Persia, led by Cyrus the Great. Would Babylon survive once again, or was its next fall going to be its last? The answers lie in the next chapter, the Golden Age of Babylon. For centuries, Babylon had risen and fallen under the rule of foreign dynasties, its fate dictated by invaders and conquerors. But in 605 BCE, a king emerged who would restore Babylon to its former glory and beyond, Nebuchadnezzar II. Under his reign, Babylon became the greatest city in the world, a center of power, culture, and innovation. This was the age of grand architecture, legendary conquests, and unmatched wealth. It was a time when Babylon wasn't just another Mesopotamian kingdom. It was the undisputed capital of the ancient world. Nebuchadnezzar II came to power in 605 BCE, following the death of his father, Nabopolassar, the king who had led the Babylonians to victory against the Assyrians. With the Assyrian Empire destroyed, Babylon now faced a new rival in the west, the Egyptians, who sought to expand their influence over the remnants of the Assyrian territories. Nebuchadnezzar wasted no time in asserting Babylon's dominance. In a decisive battle at Carchemish, 605 BCE, he crushed the Egyptian army, securing Babylonian control over Syria and the Levant. This victory solidified Babylon as the most powerful empire in the Near East, leaving only one major kingdom standing in its way, Judah. In 597 BCE, Nebuchadnezzar turned his attention to Judah, a small but rebellious kingdom in the Levant. King Jehoiakim of Judah initially submitted to Babylonian rule, but later rebelled. In response, Nebuchadnezzar led his armies to Jerusalem, capturing the city and exiling its king. However, the Judeans rebelled once again under Zedekiah, leading Nebuchadnezzar to return in 587 BCE. This time, he was ruthless. Babylonian forces besieged Jerusalem for 2 years, starving its people into submission. When the city finally fell, Nebuchadnezzar destroyed the first temple of Solomon, looted its treasures, and burned Jerusalem to the ground. Thousands of Jews were taken into exile in Babylon, an event known as the Babylonian captivity. This exile had a profound impact on Jewish history, as it led to the development of new religious traditions and texts that would later shape Judaism. While Nebuchadnezzar was feared as a conqueror, he was also known as a builder. He embarked on an ambitious plan to transform Babylon into the most magnificent city in the world. His most famous project? The Hanging Gardens of Babylon, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. According to ancient accounts, the Hanging Gardens were built for Nebuchadnezzar's wife, Amytis of Media, who missed the lush green landscapes of her homeland. To please her, Nebuchadnezzar created a massive terraced garden filled with exotic plants, waterfalls, and trees. These gardens were said to have been built on an artificial mountain, using an advanced irrigation system to transport water from the Euphrates River to the highest levels. However, the Hanging Gardens remain one of history's greatest mysteries. While Greek and Roman writers described them in great detail, no definitive archaeological evidence has ever been found. Some historians believe they were a legend, while others suggest they may have been located elsewhere, possibly in Nineveh. Regardless of their existence, the Hanging Gardens symbolize the wealth, ambition, and engineering brilliance of Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon. Among Nebuchadnezzar's many construction projects, none were as iconic as the Ishtar Gate. This massive gateway, built around 575 BCE, served as the grand entrance to Babylon, leading into the city's processional way, a road lined with golden lions and religious temples. The Ishtar Gate was made of deep blue glazed bricks, decorated with images of dragons, bulls, and lions, symbolizing the gods Marduk, Adad, and Ishtar. It stood as a symbol of Babylonian power and divine protection, impressing visitors and striking fear into those who opposed the empire. Today, parts of the original Ishtar Gate have been reconstructed and can be seen in the Pergamon Museum in Berlin, a testament to the grandeur of Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon. Among Nebuchadnezzar's many construction projects, none were as iconic as the Ishtar Gate. This massive gateway, built around 575 BCE, served as the grand entrance to Babylon, leading into the city's processional way, a road lined with golden lions and religious temples. The Ishtar Gate was made of deep blue, glazed bricks, decorated with images of dragons, bulls, and lions, symbolizing the gods Marduk, Adad, and Ishtar. It stood as a symbol of Babylonian power and divine protection, impressing visitors and striking fear into those who opposed the empire. Today, parts of the original Ishtar Gate have been reconstructed and can be seen in the Pergamon Museum in Berlin, a testament to the grandeur of Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon. Beyond its military strength and architectural wonders, Babylon became a hub of science, mathematics, and astronomy during Nebuchadnezzar's reign. Babylonian scholars mapped the stars, developed early forms of algebra, and recorded astronomical events, laying the groundwork for future civilizations. The Babylonians were pioneers of timekeeping, developing a base 60 numerical system, which is why we have 60-minute hours and 360-degree circles today. They also recorded eclipses and planetary movements, influencing later Greek and Islamic astronomers. Culturally, Babylon was a melting pot of traditions, hosting scribes, poets, and priests who preserved the knowledge of past civilizations. Its libraries contain thousands of clay tablets documenting laws, myths, and medical practices. Despite all his achievements, Nebuchadnezzar's death in 562 BCE marked the beginning of Babylon's decline. His successors were weak and unstable, leading to political chaos and internal struggles. The once great empire weakened, making it vulnerable to external threats. In 539 BCE, just a few decades after Nebuchadnezzar's death, a new superpower emerged, the Persian Empire, led by Cyrus the Great. Unlike the brutal conquests of the past, Cyrus took Babylon without a fight, entering the city peacefully and declaring himself its new ruler. Babylon's independence was over, and the city that Nebuchadnezzar had built into the greatest in the world was now part of the Persian Empire. Conclusion: Nebuchadnezzar's enduring legacy. Though Babylon eventually fell to Persia, Nebuchadnezzar II's legacy endured. He transformed a once ordinary city into the greatest metropolis of its time, leaving behind architectural marvels, scientific advancements, and a lasting impact on history. His name still stands as a symbol of power, ambition, and innovation. Even today, Babylon remains a legend, remembered for its great kings, incredible structures, and its role in shaping human civilization. But the story isn't over yet. Under Persian, Greek, and later rulers, Babylon would continue to evolve, until one day it would vanish into the sands of time. For decades, under the rule of Nebuchadnezzar II, Babylon was the most powerful city in the world. Its walls were impenetrable, its wealth unmatched, and its cultural influence undeniable. However, great empires do not fall in a day. They collapse from within, long before an enemy ever reaches their gates. After the death of Nebuchadnezzar II in 562 BCE, Babylon entered a period of weak leadership, political instability, and internal strife. The once mighty empire that had dominated Mesopotamia began to crumble from within, making it vulnerable to a new rising power, one that would change the course of history forever. This is the story of how Babylon, the greatest city of its time, fell not through battle, but through betrayal and submission. Nebuchadnezzar II was the last truly great ruler of Babylon. His successors were weak, incompetent, and constantly embroiled in political struggles. In the 23 years following his death, Babylon went through 5 different kings, each more ineffective than the last. His immediate successor, Amel-Marduk, Evil Merodach, ruled for only 2 years before being assassinated. He was overthrown by Neriglissar, who managed to hold power for 4 years before dying mysteriously. His son, Labashi-Marduk, was even more short-lived. He ruled for just 9 months before being violently removed from the throne. Finally, in 556 BCE, a man named Nabonidus took power. However, he was an unpopular and controversial ruler. Unlike previous Babylonian kings, who prioritized the worship of Marduk, Nabonidus promoted the god Sin, causing friction with the powerful priestly class. His religious changes angered the people, and his unpopular rule further weakened Babylon from within. But the most fatal mistake of all, Nabonidus left Babylon for nearly a decade, choosing to live in the distant Arabian city of Taima, leaving his son Belshazzar to rule Babylon in his place. This decision isolated the king from his own people, creating a deep divide within the empire. As Babylon struggled under its own internal conflicts, a new power was rising in the east, Persia, under Cyrus the Great. While Babylon was crumbling, Persia was growing stronger. Under the leadership of Cyrus II, later known as Cyrus the Great, the Persian Empire expanded rapidly, conquering the powerful Median Empire in 550 BCE and the Lydian Kingdom in 546 BCE. Cyrus was not just a warrior, he was a master strategist. Unlike the Babylonians, who had become arrogant and complacent, Cyrus carefully built alliances, incorporating various peoples into his empire and ensuring loyalty among his subjects. By 540 BCE, Cyrus had his eyes set on Babylon. The once mighty empire was now divided, weakened by internal dissent and an unpopular king. Nabonidus and Belshazzar had lost the support of both the military and the priesthood, making Babylon an easy target. Cyrus did not need to storm Babylon's legendary walls. He simply needed to turn its own people against it. In 539 BCE, Cyrus launched his invasion of Babylonia. His army, led by his brilliant general Gobryas, advanced quickly, capturing key cities without resistance. Nabonidus, who had spent years alienating his own people, could not mount an effective defense. The decisive moment came when Cyrus's forces reached the walls of Babylon itself. The Babylonians had long believed their city was impenetrable. Their walls were among the most formidable in the ancient world. However, walls mean nothing if the defenders within them have no will to fight. According to historical accounts, the Persians diverted the waters of the Euphrates River, lowering the water level enough for their soldiers to enter the city through its drainage canals. At the same time, Babylon's own people, fed up with their rulers, welcomed Cyrus as a liberator. Without a single major battle, Babylon surrendered. Nabonidus fled but was quickly captured, and Belshazzar was killed. In one night, Babylon's independence was over. The city that had ruled the world had fallen without a fight. With Babylon now under Persian control, Cyrus the Great declared himself King of Babylon, King of the four corners of the world. But unlike past conquerors who had destroyed cities they defeated, Cyrus spared Babylon and incorporated it peacefully into his empire. One of his first acts as ruler was to allow the Jewish exiles in Babylon to return to their homeland, an event recorded in the Bible as the Cyrus Cylinder Decree. This act of mercy earned Cyrus a reputation as a just and enlightened ruler, setting him apart from previous conquerors. Babylon was no longer the capital of an empire, but it remained one of the greatest cities in the Persian realm. The Persians respected Babylonian culture, preserving its temples, trade networks, and scientific knowledge. However, Babylon's role as a dominant power was over. Over the following centuries, it would be ruled by the Persians, the Greeks under Alexander the Great, and later the Parthians. By the time of the Roman era, Babylon had declined into ruins, its once grand temples abandoned. Eventually, the once mighty city was completely deserted, swallowed by the sands of time. The fall of Babylon was not just a military conquest, it was a lesson in history. It was a warning that no empire, no matter how powerful, is invincible. It showed that weak leadership, internal divisions, and arrogance are just as dangerous as external enemies. Babylon fell not because of its walls, but because of its leaders' failures, its people's discontent, and its inability to adapt. And yet, even though the city itself eventually disappeared, its legacy lived on. The laws of Hammurabi influenced modern legal systems. The Babylonians' astronomical discoveries shaped the future of science. Their myths, legends, and cultural achievements still echo in literature and history. Babylon, the city that once ruled the world, may have fallen, but its name still stands as a symbol of human. In 539 BCE, Babylon, once the greatest city in the world, fell to Cyrus the Great and the Persian Empire without a fight. Unlike past conquerors who had plundered and destroyed the city, Cyrus spared Babylon and sought to integrate it into his growing empire. But while Babylon remained a great center of culture, learning, and trade, it would never again be the dominant power of Mesopotamia. For nearly 2 centuries, Babylon remained an important city under Persian rule, but its role had shifted. No longer the capital of an empire, it was now just one of many regional centers in the vast Persian domain. However, Babylon's story was far from over. A new conqueror was rising in the west, Alexander the Great, and his arrival in Babylon would mark one of the most dramatic and mysterious chapters in the city's history. Babylon under Persian rule, a city of culture, not power under Persian rule, 539 to 331 BCE, Babylon was treated with respect. The Persians saw themselves as the rightful heirs of ancient Mesopotamian civilization and worked to maintain Babylon's temples, culture, and religious traditions. Cyrus the Great famously allowed the Jewish exiles in Babylon to return to Jerusalem, an act recorded in the Bible and on the Cyrus Cylinder, one of the earliest declarations of human rights. Despite this, Babylon was no longer a political or military power. The Persian rulers governed from Persepolis, Susa, and Ecbatana, relegating Babylon to a secondary administrative city. Over time, its influence declined as Persian kings focused their efforts on other regions. However, Babylon remained a center of science, trade, and astronomy. Persian kings continued to fund the city's great temples, including the Esagila, dedicated to the god Marduk. Babylonian scholars made significant contributions to mathematics, astrology, and medicine, preserving the city's reputation as an intellectual powerhouse. But by the late 4th century BCE, the Persian Empire itself was facing a new threat, one that would bring Babylon back into the spotlight. In 331 BCE, the Persian Empire suffered a crushing defeat at the Battle of Gaugamela, where Alexander the Great overthrew King Darius III and seized control of the Persian world. After this victory, Babylon opened its gates to Alexander, welcoming him as its new ruler. Unlike previous conquerors, Alexander did not loot or destroy Babylon. In fact, he fell in love with the city. He admired its rich culture, grand temples, and scholarly traditions, and he envisioned making Babylon the capital of his empire. To restore Babylon to its former greatness, Alexander ordered repairs to its temples and public buildings. He planned to turn the city into a cosmopolitan hub, a place where Greek and Mesopotamian cultures could merge. Some historians believe he even planned to rebuild the legendary Tower of Babel, a massive ziggurat that had fallen into ruin. For the first time in centuries, Babylon seemed poised for a new golden age, but fate had other plans. In 323 BCE, just as Alexander was preparing for further campaigns, tragedy struck. He fell gravely ill in Babylon. After days of fever and weakness, he died at the age of 32 in the palace of Nebuchadnezzar II. The cause of Alexander's death remains one of history's greatest mysteries. Some believe he died of malaria or typhoid fever, while others suggest he was poisoned by his generals in a struggle for power. His sudden death shattered his empire, as his vast territories were divided among his generals, the Diadochi, successors, who soon began fighting over control of Babylon. This instability marked the beginning of Babylon's final decline. Following Alexander's death, Babylon became a battleground. His generals fought for control of the empire, and the city changed hands multiple times between rival factions. The once prosperous city suffered from warfare, population decline, and political instability. By the 2nd century BCE, the newly rising Parthian Empire had taken control of Mesopotamia, but by this time, Babylon was already losing its significance. Many of its scholars, merchants, and inhabitants had moved to Seleucia, a newer city built nearby by Alexander's general Seleucus I. Over time, Babylon's temples fell into disrepair, and its once thriving streets became empty. By the early centuries CE, Babylon was virtually abandoned, its mighty walls and towers left to crumble into dust. The city that had once ruled the world vanished into the sands of time, with only ruins remaining as a reminder of its former glory. Although Babylon was ultimately abandoned, its legacy endured. The achievements of Babylonian science, law, and architecture influenced later civilizations, including the Romans and Islamic scholars. The mathematical and astronomical discoveries made in Babylon laid the foundation for modern timekeeping and navigation. Even today, Babylon remains one of the most legendary cities in history, symbolizing the rise and fall of human civilizations. Its ruins still standing in modern-day Iraq. What happened to Babylon, the greatest city of the ancient world? How did a metropolis that once ruled Mesopotamia, housed legendary wonders, and shaped the course of civilization vanish into obscurity? By the time of the Roman era, Babylon was little more than a collection of abandoned ruins. The once mighty walls of Nebuchadnezzar II had crumbled, the grand temples had been left to decay, and its streets were empty. Over centuries, the Euphrates River changed course, covering parts of the city in sand and silt. Wars, migrations, and changing empires left Babylon forgotten, a ghost of its former self. For centuries, Babylon existed only in legends and ancient texts. But in the 19th and 20th centuries, archaeologists began uncovering the city's lost secrets. German archaeologist Robert Koldewey led extensive excavations in the early 1900s, revealing the Ishtar Gate, the ruins of the Hanging Gardens, and remnants of Nebuchadnezzar's Grand Palace. Today, Babylon's ruins lie near Hilla, Iraq, where archaeologists continue to uncover inscriptions, artifacts, and evidence of Babylonian life. In 2019, UNESCO declared Babylon a World Heritage Site, recognizing its importance to human history. Yet challenges remain. War, neglect, and modern construction have damaged parts of the site, and much of Babylon's former grandeur exists only in museums, such as the Pergamon Museum in Berlin, where the original Ishtar Gate is displayed. Though Babylon itself no longer stands, its legacy lives on. Law and justice. Hammurabi's code was one of the first legal systems in history, influencing modern legal principles. Time and mathematics. The Babylonians gave us the 60-minute hour, the 360-degree circle, and early algebra. Astronomy and science. Babylonian scholars mapped the stars, laying the groundwork for astronomy. Culture and literature. Stories from Babylon, like the Epic of Gilgamesh, shaped later myths and religions. Even the name Babylon survives, often used as a symbol of power, decadence, and mystery in books, films, and music. Babylon was more than just a city. It was a symbol of human ambition. It represented the heights of art, science, military power, and cultural achievement. Though empires rose and fell, Babylon left a lasting imprint on history, shaping the world as we know it today. Was it the greatest city ever built? That depends on how you define greatness. But one thing is certain, Babylon's story is one of the most fascinating tales in human history. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Babylon's incredible history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more amazing historical explorations. Which ancient city should we cover next? Let us know in the comments.